Welcome to Talent Fueling Ambition, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the unfiltered realities of building and scaling a business from the ground up. I'm Jason Walker, co-founder of Walker Smith, and this podcast is for founders, leaders, and entrepreneurs, the ones bold enough to chase what's next. So let's talk about managing people, managing a team. I've been in recruitment now for more than 30 years, and I started managing teams of individuals for, I would say, pretty much in the year 2001, 2002. And the biggest challenge that I found with running a team and managing the team is really trying to understand what are the components that will motivate them to be the best version of themselves without your leadership skills and your leadership style getting in the way. What I've found is that throughout the years of managing staff, I learned more from my mistakes than I really did from any of the wins, which isn't a great way to develop your skills, because usually when you make mistakes, when you're managing a team, it's often at the expense of other people. So it's essential that you do take whatever those errors were and you do learn and you incorporate those into being a better version of yourself when it comes to managing a team. I also found in the New Zealand marketplace, what was quite a challenge is really motivating others to take leadership roles, because I think that leading a team and leading other people is seen to be considered quite a difficult thing to do, particularly when you are focused on trying to achieve great performances yourself. More often than not, managing a team can get in the way of your own personal goals or personal targets that you have. So again, once you start becoming a leader, there's this conflict and confrontation with your own needs versus the needs of the team. And I found that quite a number of individuals weren't willing to make that sacrifice, because managing a team is sacrificing what you want for what the team wants. Do personality types matter in the workplace when it comes to managing a team? Absolutely. I think personality, character are all factors in terms of every team that you manage. Everyone's different. There's diversity of thought, there's diversity of ethnicities and backgrounds and all types of things. And that comes with its own unique challenges. But what I do find is that it's essential right at the start of building any business, developing any team, that you have values, ground rules, visions set in place. It's almost as if you're building a framework and a foundation for a house. The stronger the foundation that you have in place, then the easier it is to build the walls and decorate and expand. But if you have very weak foundations, then you'll find pretty quickly you're going to have gaps in your leadership style, and there'll be challenges and issues that come through that, just like having poor foundations of a house. So it's essential that you have a very, very strong framework which guides the direction that the business is going to go in terms of managing a team, and also is used for a lot of the decision making. So it's fair, it's consistent right across the board, and that everyone is aware that they have to be accountable to whatever foundations and structures and disciplines that you put in place in the business. Should everyone manage in the same way, or should they manage within their own style? I think it's very difficult to manage a team when you come across as inauthentic. I think you need to be authentic. You need to make sure that that authenticity flows through your management style, but you do need to have a framework to manage by. Early on in my career, I found a book, and it was called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Absolutely love that book, and a lot of the skills that I've developed were as a direct reflection of all the insights and the content and the context that he gave in that book. The key summary is the dysfunctions of a team, first of all, is trust. It's very difficult to build a team without that level of trust. And once you have that trust, and what I mean by trust is there has to be this psychological safety, the sense of belonging within a team, so everyone feels that they have a voice, everyone feels that they can communicate regardless of what the situation is, good or bad. Once you have that trust, then you can then start to have open channels of honest communication. When you have open, honest communication, then that invites everyone to be heard and to have a valuable contribution, it doesn't mean that you need to make a decision based on everyone's thoughts and ideas, but everyone needs to have an opinion and be part of that process. The next part is then once you have open communication, you can start building in the commitment that you require to get the results that you're after as a team, as a business, as an organisation. From commitment, that moves to accountability. Keep people accountable to their commitments that they make, and I find accountability is one of the areas that a lot of managers find it difficult to manage or difficult to incorporate it into their teams. And once you have the commitment, the accountability, then you can drive the results. But it all starts from a foundation of trust and open communication. And if you have those frameworks in place, then you can put your own authentic style alongside those. Dealing with individuals who think differently, in a workplace you're going to have very rational thinkers, those who are very driven by numbers and process. You'll have very intuitive thinkers, those who are driven by how they feel and how they sense things. Those team members need to be managed completely differently. However, a manager needs to have the ability and the empathy to be able to read when something is off with their team. And there are a lot of signals in terms of that. What you'll see is maybe those who are more rational, you'll see that their numbers starting to fall away, their metrics or their stats, their KPIs start to falter. For those who are more intuitive thinkers, you'll start to read and sense that they're not feeling right, that they're not contributing, they're not feeling part of the culture. And you need to be sensitive to the different team members and how they think while you're, driving and improving performance. And so a manager needs to be many things, but I think most of all, have the ability to sense and see and get a read for, I would say, between the lines or between the gaps, what your team aren't telling you, what the individuals aren't telling you, and being able to read those situations. So if you're a leader out there and you're running a team, I think it's important to think about and consider how much open communication you have running between you and your team members and how honest that communication is. If you have those reporting into you where it's always great news, everything's fine, everything's wonderful, then I can guarantee that it's probably not. And you really need to drill down and get under the skin of that business, because people will tell you what they think you want to hear other than what you probably need to hear to help, drive the business and get good results. So it's trying to appreciate and understand what is that level of trust and communication that's flowing through your organization, because that's where the roadblocks really start. If there's a communication breakdown, it's going to be very, very challenging to connect with your team to help improve productivity and performance. And if you really want to make your leadership consistent, then there needs to be some consistent behaviors that are acceptable or unacceptable within your business. What I mean by that is that your behaviors should attach to the values, and the values should be those things that drive your business forward. More often than not, I've had incredible performers who've reported into me who, through their own personality and characteristics, have created roadblocks for the rest of the team to perform, and have almost stopped the business from progressing because it's become all about them. They create a very toxic environment, and what makes that challenging is that you think, oh my gosh, do I keep these people on because they are growing and building revenue? And do I deal with the fallout of all the other team members as a result of that? And then you might have all those others in your business who might not be the top performers, the greatest performers, but could be the glue holding everyone together. So you need to make sure that there's something consistent right across your team. And I find that having critical and key behaviors in place, get up, dress up, show up, and making sure that those behaviors are driving positive activity, and that positive activity is creating results for all the team, then you can be fairly consistent regardless of performance. And at the same time, if you are an underperformer, you manage behaviors first, because behaviors are precursors to activity, which are precursors to results. If you're a top performer and they've got poor behaviors, then you can still manage behaviors. You sit down and say your behaviors are aligned with the values of the business, and you change the behaviors. Managing a team is very, very difficult. However, what I often see within organizations, within teams, is that the underperformers will often get the more energy, more focus, more energy, more time from their leaders. And in a way, the top performers are left to their own devices. and sometimes don't get the extra acknowledgement, don't get the extra reward or extra recognition of time. And do you throw your top performers more promotional opportunities, more money, more development opportunities? Well, yeah, everyone loves those things. However, sometimes it's just spending time with their manager and their leader to acknowledge what a great performance is. So it could be just taking them out for lunch, having a chat, and finding out where they want to go, what they want to do. And quite often, top performers may want to be developed in certain areas or different ways. But when we have underperformers in a business, they can suck so much of your time and attention away that they get a disproportionate amount of time and focus on them without actually getting any result or any additional impact which you need for the business. I would say you have to stay close to your top performers. You need to make sure that you give them time to just vent, have a conversation, just chat, but make the time available. Just because they're doing well doesn't mean that they don't need your time and attention. I want to sort of tell a story really about how my leadership adapted. I'd gone through one of these executive leadership development courses with one of the organizations I worked for, and they did this 360. And if you've ever done a 360, it's about how you feel about the people you report into, and then also going out to find out how those who report into you feel about your leadership style. And what I realized pretty quickly is that, they seemed to me it was either Jason's way or the highway, that they felt unheard, they didn't feel listened to as part of my management style. I wasn't upset, but I was shocked. The reason I was shocked is because I thought as a manager, they wanted me to solve everything. They wanted me to have solutions to all their problems. But in fact, what they wanted me to be able to do was provide a really empathetic ear to hear what their solutions were and provide them with a bit of direction and provide them with a bit of support. And sometimes provide them with the solutions, but not all the time. And so I went back to the team, and what I did do was actually sit down with them and say, look, I didn't realize that's what you wanted. So from here on in, when you do come to me with a problem, I'd like you to have thought about a couple of solutions you can also present to me, and then we can talk those through. A couple of things happened. First of all, I stopped getting problems because some of them actually had already thought through the solutions, so they didn't have to bring them to me. And those who did bring their problems to me, they had some really good ideas. They just wanted me to give them some little bit of insights and a little bit of extra direction on those. And we started to have better open channels of communication, trust built up, and my leadership style improved as a result from that. So instead of feeling that I had to be the solution to all their problems, I just needed to be the leader and the manager who could facilitate the solution to those problems. And sometimes it wasn't about me giving them the answer because they had the answers within themselves all the time. So more often than not, when you're having a challenging or a difficult conversation with a team member, it's because of either poor behaviours, poor activity, or poor results, right? And nobody likes having these conversations, but the more you avoid having those conversations, and the more that the rest of your team are aware that these behaviours or lack of activity or lack of results are impacting the team, the more that they feel they can get away with doing the same thing. So you're actually creating more problems for yourself down the line if you don't confront those things up front. Now, yes, there is a skill involved in having those conversations. Yes, it is very challenging. Yes, I would say get some coaching, get some mentoring, or understand how to do it properly, because you don't want to damage or create any additional problems for the individual you're talking to. You have to have empathy. But if you avoid those conversations, it will build bigger issues down the line. What I have found even recently is when you sit down with somebody and you have a conversation and a discussion which is challenging around behaviours, if you have those frameworks in place, is that more often than not, nobody's ever sat down and had a conversation with them before to help them stay on track or stay in the right direction. And it only works if you do have these parameters in place. If you're sitting down with somebody and having a challenging conversation and it is a surprise to them, then it's going to be a very difficult conversation for you. So there can't be any surprise. And that means there needs to be an understanding of what good looks like, what great looks like, and what sort of average looks like or what an underperformance looks like in any business. And that's around behaviours, activities and results. So that there is a line in the sand that you can use when you sit down and have these meetings. Because if you're sitting down with somebody and the conversation is going to be a difficult and challenging one, then you both need to be on the same page in terms of what you're talking about and what you're covering. So that's the first bit of advice I'd give you. So ask yourself, in our business, do we have some pretty firm guidelines of what good looks like, what bad looks like, what great looks like? Have we incorporated those into the behaviours and the activities of the team that I'm managing and that I'm growing? And if we haven't, then how do we go about doing that? And when I do sit down with somebody and having a challenging and difficult conversation, are they aware about what we're going to be sitting down and talking about? Or is it going to be a complete surprise to them? Because if it's a surprise, then go back to step one. You need to start putting those fundamentals in place so that can help reduce the impact of the conversations. It won't take away the difficulty. It won't take away the uncomfortableness of having the sit down with that team member, but it will provide you with a framework and a structure that you can use. What about praise and criticism when it comes to your team members? Well, I have an approach, might be the wrong approach, but it's an approach I take and it's an approach that works for me. Maybe it will work for you. And the approach I take is that if I'm going to praise and acknowledge somebody, I do it in public, I do it when their team is around, and I do it immediately something good happens. If I have to, I'm not going to say criticize because I think that's the wrong word, but if I have to critique somebody's performance or behaviours, then I will do that behind closed doors, in person, one-on-one, or if they have another leader, manager or mentor with that person present as well. Because I don't believe that you should try and embarrass and shame somebody into performing. I don't think that style of leadership should be seen in the workplace anymore, but you do need to act on poor behaviours or poor activity immediately. I know this is a silly way of looking at it, but I've got pets. I love dogs. I have 3 dogs. And, you know, when your dog comes up to you and you ask it to sit and it does something brilliantly and it sits and you're training it to do new things, what do? You give it a treat straight away, right? Because if you keep on giving it treats for good behaviours, it will keep on doing those good behaviours and it learns. The dog soils somewhere in the house and then, you know, you tell it off 2 or 3 hours later, it's got no idea why you're telling it off. You need to manage behaviours, good or bad, the moment they happen. Or if there's clusters, the moment those clusters sort of flow into each other, don't leave it for a month later. It's too late by then. Water's under the bridge, but you need to move on it quickly, whether it's good or bad. If you have clarity, then they can move ahead with certainty, right? But I know this is what I need to do. I know this is what I need to achieve. And clarity can come in all sorts of forms. What do I do today? What do I do this week? What do I do this month? What am I planning to do over the next 90 days, 6 months? Having clarity around those types of things is important because when you have clarity, it creates certainty. When somebody has certainty, they have confidence. When they have confidence, they can then go forward and do their role and do it well. Without clarity, it creates confusion. With confusion, it's uncertainty. With uncertainty, it's chaos. What do I do? Where do I go? And then a conversation around poor performance becomes a surprise. So it needs to start with clarity, which ties into your visions, your values, your behaviours. If I can provide some advice and some insights to those who are new to leadership and new to management, the first thing I would say is do it. I think you've got to do it before you know whether or not you're going to like it. Don't avoid it. There's going to be a lot of discomfort when you start to learn a new skill and leadership. But one of the challenges, if you are one of the team members that's promoted amongst the team and suddenly you're managing your colleagues, managing those who are your friends, that can be very difficult because those who were once colleagues who confided in you, suddenly there's a little invisible wall between you and the team. And there needs to be, and I'm going to say this right now, you can still remain friends, but that level of familiarity is probably going to need to dissolve slightly, and there needs to be a slight gap. because when it comes to having a difficult conversation with one of your team members who needs to be a colleague, the closer the friendship, the closer the relationship, the more difficult that conversation could be, particularly if you need to establish and deliver some pretty stinging home truths that can happen in the workplace. Not always the case. Sometimes you can be a little bit more informal if that's the type of atmosphere, that's the type of culture that you have. But it is difficult when you first move into leadership, when you are starting to lead those that were your ex-colleagues. As you develop your own leadership style, there will automatically be a gap that starts to grow between you and the team. What's the difference between being liked and respected in management? Now, this comes down to the individual. Personally, myself, I'd rather be respected than liked. I mean, I'd like to be both. However, if I had to choose one, I'd choose respect over like. If the teams that you lead respect you, more often than not, they'll do the work that needs to be done when you're not there. And I think that's the main thing for me, is that they work because they respect you. If they like you but not respect you, then they'll try and get away with whatever they can. I find that tough. If I was to reflect and look back on the teams that I've managed and the individuals that I've managed, I would say as I've become a more experienced leader, I've got the right balance and mix between respect and like. Back in the day, I think I was more respected than liked. And it was okay. It meant that there was clarity, there was a line in the sand. But I think it's nice to have a combination of both when you're leading a team, or else it makes it difficult for you, the manager. You don't want to go in there every day and think that nobody likes me but they respect me. I think it's good to have a nice balance. So if you wanted to improve your team or leadership style tomorrow, the first thing I would say is, how much structure do you have in place in terms of the behaviours and the activities and the results which you expect from your team? That's the first thing I'm going to suggest, is do a bit of an audit and do a bit of a benchmark of what that looks like. Second thing I would suggest, that if you don't have any of those things in place, start working on them. What sort of behaviours do you want to have in your business which would create the culture, which would mean that you could have a high-performing business with high standards? I would say, what are those look like? The next thing I would look at, well, what are some of the non-negotiable activities that you want to make sure that your team does and that they need to do to drive the results that you're looking for in your business? And thirdly, I would say, have courage to sit down once you've had the information, talk them through with your team maybe before implementing, getting their input, and then, do a workshop. Have a day where you get your team there, get them all on board with the structure, with the values, with the activities, with the framework, so that they all have clarity and that you can drive forward with purpose. And once you have those in place, then you can have those conversations. You can help improve performance. That when you are sitting down with team members, that they know that you're coming from the right place, that you want them to do better and you want them to do well. You just need to be fair and you need to be unbiased. You need to be disciplined. You need to have clarity. You need to be confident about how you're going to approach it. And at the same time, you need to consider that the people that you're leading are human. At the end of the day, they've got their own loves and likes and dislikes and interests, all these things that are going on outside of their work lives that you still need to consider as a leader as much as what they do in the workplace. So it's essential that you have the ability to connect and show empathy with every member of your team. The takeaway for today is maybe do your own 360 degree on your own leadership, but in a very simple way. Perhaps write down 5 descriptors of what you believe your leadership style is, and perhaps go out to your team and ask them to do a similar exercise about you as well. See where the gaps are, see where you agree, or even when you write down those 5 things, consider whether or not they're the right things that will help your team perform, and if not, are there any areas that you need to grow and develop? Thank you for joining us at the Talent Fueling Ambition podcast, and we look forward to connecting again soon with more ideas for leaders, entrepreneurs, and founders.